Hey guys, Aaron here, your host on Keep Painting Minis. Today we'll paint the Dwarf Hero from the 2022 release of the HeroQuest board game. We'll make a few mistakes, we'll learn as we go, we'll learn and improve, and most importantly, we'll have lots of fun. So let's get after painting that dwarf. Alright guys, and of course we begin with priming. Now since many of our base coats are going to be the Citadel contrast paints, we want to prime with one of the lighter colors. Now Citadel will recommend the Wraithbone Spray-On Primer. We can simulate that with some terrific Stynel res through the airbrush. That's what I like to do. If you drop a little bit of the beige into the white, you get a little bit of off-white, which is very similar to the Wraithbone. That works well with contrast. Now as you can see here, well, the dwarf comes in the box pre-assembled, but there was a significant gap between his arm and his torso, and we're going to want to fill that so that we have a seamless dwarf on our hands. I love to use the epoxy sculpt, 2 parts. It manipulates very well. You can keep it soft with water, and it doesn't shrink when it dries. So this is a terrific material to fill gaps with. And then you just pick up a little bit of that white Stynel res and you complete the priming. Alright, now, color palette. What color are we going to paint our dwarf? Well, we can always turn to the box art, right? This is the card from the game that shows our dwarf, but you know what? I'm old school. I'm not sure I love the blues and the yellows and the purples. I'm kind of an old school OG dwarf kind of guy. And that, of course, means orange hair and orange beard. And of course, if you're going to go with the orange hair and the orange beard, then you need some desaturated clothing and armor on the cooler side to contrast wonderfully with the orange hair and the orange beard, paired with some warm brown and reddish tones for his leather elements, and then some cool steel and blue tones for his metallics. I think that's just going to give us a very visually appealing dwarf. Alright, so we have a palette, we have a plan, let's get started. Okay, let's get started by going in with Citadel's Fireslayer Flesh contrast paint. I'm usually a fan of the Gilman Flesh, but I'm thinking for our dwarf, a little darker. The Fireslayer Flesh has a more dark brown tone compared to Gilman Flesh. And we like to follow the inside-out approach, so we start with base coating the flesh and then work our way out to the clothing and then the armor and so forth. Now here's the thing about contrast paints. I think many people apply them wrong. Contrast paints need to be applied differently, in my opinion, compared to the more traditional acrylics, and that is you gotta load up the brush and then just let the paint wick off the brush, as opposed to pushing it onto the surface. I think that's the way contrast paints were designed, so they can behave well by capillary action, just get sucked off the brush by the surface and into the crevices and away from the outer surfaces, giving us our highlights. So watch how I do this. There's plenty of fluid on the brush, and I'm touching the surface and I'm just letting the liquid be drawn off the brush. And I think that's the best way to avoid those tide marks and splotches when it comes to applying contrast paints. If you have a different view, give this a try and let me know in the comments what you think about that. So here is our Fireslayer Flesh. It makes for a great dwarf flesh base coat, darker than Gilman Flesh on the brown side, and being contrast paints, a little bit of tide marks and pooling, but we're gonna tidy that up wonderfully with our highlight steps. And now we're gonna bring in our Gore Grunta contrast to get after the base coats for our leather. Gore Grunta fur is a nice warm brown with some warm red hue, which will perfectly complement our fiery orange dwarf hairdo. So now we are Gore Grunting the leather part of his boots, and also, as you'll see, the leather torso armor, and that's where we begin to run into a little bit of a problem. So again, you'll see how I apply this contrast paint, which is to load up the brush and let the surface just wick the paint off the brush by capillary action, and I think that's the favorite way the contrast paint wants to be applied. So we're getting that nice warm brown with the red hue onto the boots, and then we start to get after the torso leather armor, and here's where we begin to run into a little bit of a problem with contrast paints on a flat surface. So, oh my goodness, that is a little bit more patchy than we're hoping for. I'm trying to fix that up by wicking some of the paint away, and it looks like he's taken an acid bath. But of course I have a plan to fix that. We're going to apply a 50-50 of glazed medium and red over the top. That's going to smooth all that blotching out, giving us a perfectly presentable leather armor. So now we've got our super thin glaze that's going to bring everything together. And here we go. So let's get that glaze going. Let's slap some of that on. And okay. Now it looks like he's had an acid bath covered by tomato juice. No, let's try it on the boots now. Okay, all right, that's looking just right. That's the treatment we want. It seems to work wonderfully on the boots, which are already smooth, not too blotchy. But how about that torso leather? It's not looking. Yeah, let's try again. Okay, we'll just keep at it, and if we slather more on, I'm sure we'll kind of smooth that all out. All right. How about another boot? Now let's see how we do with the boots. Yeah, we'll just glaze that on. Okay, that does look nice, and so we like the boots. Well, let's have another look at that torso leather armor. No, time for plan C. Oh, so I know. We will glaze up the highlights with some golden brown about to this consistency, and that's gonna bring it all together. All right, here we go. Let's see. We'll want to start to hit those highlights, bring that up. Yeah, okay, let's keep at it because more is always better. How about maybe a little stippling? Okay, I can see it. Yeah, getting worse and worse. All right, but we're not going to give up. Grab a little more paint and keep working on those highlights. And okay, yeah, so that's the perfect leather texture we were looking for. Okay, yeah, stippling, little stripes, little texture. Okay, yeah, cross hatching, that'll do the trick. Okay, who's ready for Plan D? Well, everyone knows Plan D. When in doubt, bring in the opaque paint and paint over everything. All right, so we brought in the ruddy brown, heavy pigment Reaper paint, and we are going to cover that awful mess with a nice smooth brown coat. Take it back to square one, and go from there with some shading, some highlighting, and some subsequent steps. Much better, much better. And now we can get on with base coating our metallics. I love this Viejo metal color metallic range, and I always start with the dark aluminum and go from there. So now let's get all of his metallic bits base coated. So here you can see all of his metallic bits appropriately coated with our Vallejo metal color dark aluminum. Everybody loves the do it all for all purposes skeleton horde contrast, which we're going to bring in for some complementing trim, as you'll see. So now we've added a slightly warm coordinating color to the hem of his chainmail and the rope accents as well. And finally we get after base coating that fiery orange hairdo, and we're going to begin by coming in with our Grip Charger orange contrast paint. And before we forget, we're going to grab a little bit of snakebite leather to give a belt and some pouches a little bit of a different leather treatment, just as a visual variety compared to the darker brown leathers we've painted already. Perfect, and now we'll come in with some Reichland Flesh Shade to add some depth to the face. Now we'll begin highlighting the skin, first with a glaze coat of Reaper Caucasian Flesh mixed with a little glaze medium. Next we'll bring in the brighter Reaper Elf Flesh for the final skin highlight. Now we'll begin to bring that fiery orange hairdo to life, starting with adding some depth with some Seraphim Sepia Shade. Before we get after highlighting the orange hair, let's bring our cool shade color to the metallics with the contrast Griff Charger Gray. So that's added a cool green blue to our steel to contrast nicely with the warm orange hair and brown leather tones. Now we're going to bring our metallics back up with successively brighter colors of metallic highlights. Now we bring in the dark aluminum, which is slightly brighter than the steel color we just applied. And now we can get back to highlighting that fiery orange coif with a dry brushing of Pro Acryl's orange. And then a final highlight with Pro Acryl's golden yellow. Now I felt that after the orange and the yellow highlight that the hair got a little muddy and lost a little depth, so we're going in with some Agrax Earth Shade to bring back some of the depth and separation. Now we're coming in with some Nuln Oil Gloss to apply to some of the metallics that we didn't treat with the Griff Charger Gray green blue shading to offer a little visual variety amongst the metallic elements. Now, just for good measure, I wanted the red leather of the boots to be slightly more eye-catchingly red, so I'm coming in with another glaze and a slight edge highlight with the Pro Acryl Red. And with that, we're going to call our HeroQuest Dwarf complete. Of course, we could always take him further, but for a couple of hours of work, I'm super happy with how he turned out. I hope you are too. I'll have to confess that I did the eyes off camera. And also, why does he have such a boring black base? That's because he is part of a board game, and he was the last of the figures that I painted for the complete set. And they all have that boring black base. So the setting is inside a dungeon, not outdoors, where gravel and other ground cover and foliage tufts would be appropriate. I hope you enjoyed joining me for painting our HeroQuest Dwarf, stumbling at times, learning what we learned, and just having fun. If you enjoy this style of honest, candid miniature painting and learning, then you ought to like and subscribe and hit the bell button, because we're going to keep painting minis.